You can add another injury to the record of Jordan Westburg, but unfortunately, this one might be a little more serious than the rest. We'll break down his timeline coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, February 20th, 2026, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we will talk about the latest injury news to Jordan Westburg. He now has an elbow issue that could even lead to Tommy John surgery, what this means for the current timeline, and how this will play out for the Orioles trying to replace him at third base. And that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So Mike Elias speaking to the media on Friday morning, something that had been, I guess, stirring around a little bit and then was kind of first fully and officially reported by Andy Kuska of the Baltimore Banner on Thursday. He had reported that Jordan Westburg was dealing with something in his elbow and had gone to get testing on that elbow. Mike Elias and Craig Albernaz were asked about it later on Thursday, and we're mostly talking about how they're still figuring things out. It seemed pretty likely at that point that there was some sort of tear in the UCL in the elbow. They were getting MRIs. They were getting second opinions, especially because it's a position player and not a pitcher. You can look on a bit of a different Tommy John timeline. But this is where the Orioles stand. Mike Elias saying that there is a partial tear in the right elbow, the throwing elbow for Orioles Jordan Westburg. It's something that had maybe been there for a while, but as he was coming back from the oblique injury he already entered camp with, he started to feel some discomfort in that throwing elbow, went to get the MRIs, went to get it tested, and they did discover that partial tear that, again, they think maybe isn't brand new, is just now showing some signs of issues for him in his elbow. Now, what the Orioles are going to do is go the PRP injection and rest routes, right? You hear this a lot more with pitchers because generally they have more of these UCL injuries that lead to Tommy John surgery, but he's going to go with the, platelet-rich plasma injection in the elbow. It'll shut him down for a bit, and the Orioles are saying, at least at this point, he's going to be out through at least the month of April, so we know Westburg will begin the season on the injured list. We get to May, who knows? We're still in February right now, so there is an earlier timeline at this point. It's all going to be about how his elbow responds to those injections when he gets back on the field and starts throwing, and what the timeline looks like at that point. Now, obviously, the worst case scenario for this kind of injury is that Westburg has to get Tommy John surgery. It is an injury much more prevalent in pitchers, as we know, but position players can get the similar injury to their elbow and have been known to get either the internal brace or the full Tommy John surgery because of tears in their UCL. There is a situation where the injections work, rest works, and we see Jordan Westburg back with the Orioles feeling better mid-season. That is certainly a possibility, but let's at least look back at the timelines of some other guys who have had this injury. So Jorge Mateo ended up getting surgery on his UCL in August of 2024. He was back in 7 months. He returned for opening day of 2025, but he got the surgery on his non-throwing arm. That is a huge part of him being able to return like that. Bryce Harper is the biggest name who has ended up having elbow surgery. He had a small tear in the UCL in April of 2022. He tried the PRP injection and the rest, came back and was mostly DHing for the Phillies. So didn't play the field, made it through that entire 2022 season. Of course, the Phillies to the World Series before losing to the Astros. Then he got his surgery in late November, and he actually returned in May of 2023, again, just as a DH for a while. It was only 5.5 months after surgery that he came back. He did not play the field, however, until July 21st. So 2 more months added to that. So 7.5 months before he played the field. And when he was back in the field, he was only playing first base. That's when he made his transition from right field to first base, which is the position where you are throwing the ball less than any other position on the diamond. So it was more like an 8-month recovery for him. Jahmai Jones, former Oriole, he's kind of the last, maybe not the last infielder, but the last Orioles infielder to get it. He got it when he was in AAA with the O's in May of 2022. He was back on the field for the Dodgers in April of 2023 to begin that AAA season. Another interesting one is Didi Gregorius when he was with the Yankees. He actually had an injury that dated all the way back to 2014, kind of a small partial tear that wasn't bothering him pain-wise, and he played through it for 5 years. Finally got the surgery in 2019 because he made a throw in a game, and the pain just kind of flared up too much, and he couldn't play through it anymore. He missed about 8 months and then came back. So there is a possibility of guys coming back on different timelines and maybe coming back for the season. The best example is Trevor Story of the Red Sox in 2023. He had something happen in the offseason, or maybe pain got too much in the offseason, ended up having internal brace surgery on his throwing elbow in January of 2023. Internal brace is kind of a newer version of Tommy John surgery. It's a little bit less invasive, and it has a shorter recovery timeline. That is what he ended up getting. And Story was back on the field in early August of 2023 for the Red Sox. So he only missed about 7 months. Now, again, he didn't get the full Tommy John, so that probably helped with the recovery. So if Westburg were to get surgery tomorrow, there would be a chance he'd be fully recovered to at least like DH in late September and maybe be able to play the field in October if the Orioles were in the postseason. Because Trevor Story, I think, DH for a couple of games, but was almost immediately back to playing shortstop for the Red Sox in August when he returned from that surgery. So that's where the Orioles and Jordan Westburg and the training staff kind of stand at this point, right? If they saw the tear and they thought he needed surgery, he more than likely misses the vast majority of the 2026 season with the ability to come back at the end of the year and then hopefully be fully healthy and ready to go for spring training of 2027. That is one option. But most players are going to want to avoid surgery as much as they can, especially if they feel and the doctors feel there's a chance that they can avoid surgery and still get back on the field this season. And it can be annoying, but it's totally understandable for a player to feel that way. Like, surgery is a big thing. I think when you watch sports, you cover sports, you see, especially in baseball with the amount of Tommy John surgeries, you just think surgery is any other thing. But think about yourself personally. Like, there's a lot that goes into if you have personally ever had any kind of surgery. It's not anything you just brush off and say, yeah, do it, whatever, and you're fine the next day. Like, there's a lot of recovery. It takes a physical and a mental toll on you to have surgery of any kind, especially if it's something to repair your elbow, which is a big part of you being a baseball player. Even if you aren't a pitcher, it's still a big thing for a position player. And if there are ways that you can get around having surgery or delay it and play this season, I totally understand guys trying to do it. So they're going to go the PRP and rest route. It doesn't work for a lot of guys. Play the Tobias Funke meme, but it might work for us. There is less throwing for a position player than there is for a pitcher. The PRP generally doesn't work for pitchers. Maybe a higher chance of it working for a position player because you're just relying on the arm less often. So more ability to come back and be okay for a while. There could be the idea from the Orioles of saying, could we PRP injection, play with a little pain, and get him through the 2026 season? And then in October, or more hopefully November, when the Orioles season ends, does he get the surgery then, go on that 7-month or so timeline? And maybe at that point, by June of 2027, Westburg is back on the field. And so, yeah, you sacrifice some time this year because of the injections. You sacrifice some time early next year after finally getting the surgery, but you never have to miss a full-out season, and you can still produce for the team, of course, if all the other Jordan Westburg injuries are okay at that point. So that is a possibility or a plan they could be going with here, but right now, they're going to go with the PRP injection and see what happens. Obviously, the last time we saw this with an Oriole was Kyle Bradish in 2024. He had the partial tear in there that they found actually before spring training. He went with the PRP injection. He came back for the Orioles in May. He made, I believe it was 5 like awesome starts. He was incredible, but by the end of that 5th start, the pain was just too much. He went back down and did get the full Tommy John surgery, missed the rest of that season, missed the majority of last season, came back in September, but is now a fully healthy, ready to go for 2026. So that's the last time we saw the PRP for the Orioles. It did get Bradish back on the field for a bit, but ultimately it couldn't take away the surgery. It just kind of delayed it. And that is the worry for Jordan Westburg here. Like, maybe it gets him through this season if he looks okay hitting. And maybe he just does a little more DHing and a few more days off than he would usually get. But he's still an important player to this Orioles team, and he knows that. And if he can still be productive with the bat, even playing through this injury, he's going to try to do that. And guys recover from this injury, right? Even though Bryce Harper had a little bit of a down year last year, he's still been a great hitter post the surgery. Aaron Hicks had this surgery in 2019, came back, a year and a half later and still had one of the strongest outfield throwing arms in all of Major League Baseball. So once he was fully healthy, didn't really even zap his throwing strength. And Jordan Westburg he has actually a below average arm. So it's not something he's relying on in his tools anyway. I'm not worried about him long-term if he does end up getting the surgery or pull through this injury. You just never know kind of what's going to happen. I think the more important part of this, the more concerning part of this is, the Orioles still have Jordan Westburg for a while, right? He's not a free agent until after the 2029 season. They still have plenty, 4 years of team control left. But if he eventually gets surgery, you still should have him for most of 2027. Even at that point, it's still 3 more seasons with the Orioles. But I think we're at the moment where Westburg is an injury-prone player, and that's unfortunate, right? The first big injury was the broken hand in 2024. That was a freak thing. He was hit by a pitch in late July. He was able to come back in late September, but that's a freak thing. That can happen to anybody. That's not his fault at all. But then you get to all the injuries Westburg had in 2025, the hamstring, the ankle, the finger. Then he has the oblique early this offseason. Now the elbow's in the mix as well. Like, we're not there yet, but we are reaching Austin Hayes and to the next level, potentially getting towards like Nolan Reimold territory, where it's a guy with all the talent in the world who looks like he can be an all-star player. When he's healthy, he is an all-star. Like Austin Hayes has been an all-star. Jordan Westburg was an all-star in 2024, but the injuries, while not ending their career, just keeps them below the level they could be at production-wise because they just can't stay on the field. And we don't know from Westburg. He's still young, still got plenty of team control. We're not even at the point of surgery yet. They're going to try the injection and the rest. But it doesn't make you feel good about the future of Jordan Westburg. Like, he's a great player, but he needs to stay on the field. And right now, the Orioles just cannot trust him to stay on the field. So we know Westburg will miss at least the first month of the season, right? Orioles said he's out through at least April, and then they'll kind of see from there what the injections and the rest did. Either way, the Orioles are going to have at least a month where they're without Jordan Westburg. And for part of that, they're going to be without Jackson Holliday as well. So what do the O's do in the infield at the beginning of the season? And then what do they do longer term if this is a more serious issue for Jordan Westburg? We talk about that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Have you ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? Well, FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Just use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. And, futures are a great thing to look at this time of year. Picking a team to win the championship, grab a conference title. I was watching Knicks and Pistons on Thursday night, and wow, do the Pistons look good? Maybe there's a future right there. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So Jordan Westburg, it is a partial tear of the UCL in his right elbow. They're going the PRP injection and rest route. He's going to be out through April, and then we will see from there. But in the meantime, what are the Orioles going to do at the third base position? That is the big question right here. And we have to probably begin with the fact that it's not just Westburg that they're going to be without at the beginning of the season, because we already know Jackson Holliday, after getting surgery on that right hand for the broken hamate bone, is more than likely going to start the season on the IL and miss opening day. Now, in terms of the recovery timeline for Jackson's injury, as we've talked about, there's a good chance he could be back even by mid-April. So it could just be like a couple of weeks on the IL to start the season, and then he's back. But on opening day, they're going to have neither Holliday nor Westburg in there. And that is not what the plan was just a couple of weeks ago. So as I've talked about, I think Blaze Alexander, which that trade is just looking better and better by the moment by Mike Elias, is probably going to start the season at second base in place of Holliday. Now, when Holliday comes back in April, you can put him at second and you can shift Blaze Alexander to third. He's good defensively at both of those positions. I am less and less upset by the day that they gave up Cade Stroud and Wellington Arcena for Blaze Alexander. And I do think Mike Elias really kind of brought in the next Ramon Arias. You get 5 years of a solid bat and good defense at multiple positions with Alexander. I think if you're Elias at this point, and maybe he was even thinking this way when he made the trade because he knew Westburg was already dealing with the oblique issue, you might just be assuming Jordan Westburg misses a chunk of like every single season he's with the Orioles through 2029, because that's just what we've seen so far. And Alexander's a nice backup plan to have. You know, Ramon Arias did go 115, 105, 98, 114. That was his WRC plus with the Orioles in 4 straight years with good defense. Blaze's bat has not been to that level yet in his 2 years in the bigs with Arizona, and he projects to be worse with that in the bat. But he's also maybe a better and definitely a more versatile defender who can play the outfield and maybe can grow into that level of offense like Arias did. But the real question, who starts at third base to begin the year? Truly, at this point, if the Orioles don't make any other outside additions, which we'll get to, it's Coby Mayo versus Jeremiah Jackson. I think that is the question right now. I mean, maybe a guy like Weston Wilson, who's here as an NRI, who the O's got on waivers, is also technically in the mix, like has played some third base for the Phillies the past couple of years. But it really feels like Coby versus Jeremiah Jackson. Both have questions. Both are on the 40-man roster. Both have minor league options. I think this is the chance where Coby Mayo gets his first real shot to play extended third base. He's been working there already exclusively this spring. I think the Orioles made that decision from the time Westburg had the oblique issue. Kind of feels a lot better the Orioles didn't end up trading Coby Mayo for pitching this offseason. And if Coby is not a disaster over there defensively, which he could be, because it did look really, really rough the last couple of years, both in AAA and the majors when we've seen him play third base, he should get, I mean, at the very least 2 to 3 weeks plus where the position of third base is mostly his. And maybe Jeremiah Jackson, after a really good major league debut late last year, is just so good with the bat this spring and looks serviceable at third base where he played some last year that he forces his way into the spot instead. But this really seems to finally be Coby Mayo's chance, just so the Orioles have so much more invested in him from a prospect perspective. And do I trust Coby Mayo's defense at third base at this point? No. We'll see how I feel in a month after seeing him play a lot of third in spring training games. But if the bat plays more like it did in September, where he was finally a really productive hitter for the first time in his big league career, and if the bat plays closer to all the amazing numbers we saw Coby put up in the minor leagues, I can stomach the defense as long as it's not disastrous. If it's just like a little bit shaky and questionable and he's hitting, that's totally fine for now. And then get to the point where you can spread him around a little bit more and spread out the playing time when Jackson Holliday comes back. But right now, I'm giving him that shot. I'm penciling in Coby Mayo starting third baseman on opening day for the Orioles. Now, next question is, okay, let's say Jackson Holliday is back somewhere around mid-April. What do you do then? Because Holliday is going to slot into second base every single day. I think that's all going to depend how Blaze Alexander and Coby Mayo look in those 3 weeks or so that they're without Jackson Holliday. If Blaze Alexander is swinging it pretty well, he can just move over to third base because we know he can play the position defensively, especially if Mayo's looking really rough over there defensively. Blaze could just take that spot. If Mayo looks comfortable enough, or at least okay enough defensively, and he's hitting a bit, we know he has a much higher ceiling offensively than Blaze Alexander does, then you move Alexander to a utility man role, maybe a late game defensive replacement at third base, and Coby Mayo continues as your everyday third baseman with Jackson Holliday at second, at least through the end of April, and then you reevaluate where Westburg is at that point. Now, you certainly have options, and you have a potential high ceiling for guys like Alexander and especially Kobe Mayo, but neither of those guys has ever been even a league average hitter in the big leagues. And so if you get if even just you get league average offense from either Alexander or Mayo or those third base innings, it's a big downgrade from what you would get from Jordan Westburg, who is an all-star level hitter when he is healthy. And those first 2 weeks without Jackson Holliday, it's going to be a tryout kind of for both guys, Alexander and Mayo, and then you go from there. And obviously, if Jeremiah Jackson wants to continue hitting like 2025, he could certainly take the spot instead. If Weston Wilson shows some things, like he could be in the mix. You have other infielders like, a Peyton Eales and a Luis Vasquez, if they want to step up in any way, are going to be somewhat into this mix. But I really, truly think this is Kobe Mayo's time to shine. I think this is just his position at this point. Now, you also have to knock him off the opening day roster, Jordan Westburg, that is. So there's now another opening on the opening day roster. I already, on my opening day roster prediction earlier this week, gave Kobe Mayo the final bench spot, and that was in an assumption that Jordan Westburg would be healthy for opening day. Now you just move Mayo up to starting third base, and you have an open roster spot. And I talked about this a little bit on Tuesday's roster prediction, but I did say, and this was more thinking about the oblique issue, if Westburg is also on the IL along with Holliday to begin the year, which we now know he will be, I would choose rostering Luis Vasquez in the final infield spot instead of someone like Jeremiah Jackson, who clearly has a better bat than Vasquez. But if you're going to play Kobe Mayo a ton at third base and have him be your everyday guy, even if he gets better this spring training, there are still going to be serious defensive concerns. The best defensive infielder you can put on that roster is Luis Vasquez. He has big league time with the Orioles last year as well. Yes, he's not on the 40-man roster, so you'd have to make a move there near spring training, and that could be tough for the O's too. But I would take Vasquez and give him the final roster spot on the bench. He'd be a fine late-game defensive replacement for Mayo. He can play second, short, and third. He also gives you a nice feel at shortstop because when the team is healthier, Jackson Holliday is your starting second baseman, but he's also your backup shortstop for Gunnar Henderson. When you don't have Holliday and you don't have Westburg, you really do not have a single backup shortstop on the roster. So Vasquez gives you a really good defensive shortstop if you need it as well. Again, he can move to second, he can move to third. I think I would give him that last roster spot until Jackson Holliday is back. Then when Jackson comes back, you just option Vasquez to AAA. And again, you move Blaze Alexander and Kobe Mayo into some sort of third base mix, with Blaze being your utility guy, is how I would sort out the roster, at least for the Orioles at this point. But those are the internal options against Kobe Mayo, and maybe Jeremiah Jackson and Weston Wilson can slip into that conversation with Luis Vasquez gaining a bigger role. Another question I would totally understand, especially if this lasts more than just a month that they're missing Jordan Westburg. And when you're talking UCL tears and something that could lead to Tommy John surgery, it's not out of the question that Jordan Westburg could miss most of or all of the 2026 season. Like, they're not ready to say it now, and they're going to go the other route. But this could end up being, hey, the PRP injections and the rest didn't work and he needs surgery, and then we don't see him until 2027. So if you're the Orioles and you're thinking that's a possibility, do you look outside the organization for some help? That's coming up next to finish off the show. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for sponsored jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So you spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing the candidates who check all your boxes. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. So would the Orioles consider looking outside the organization at third base? Because right now they are going PRP injection and rest for Jordan Westburg. Now, will that work? That's the big question. Because generally, those players still end up getting TJ, or at least the internal brace or some sort of surgery. That doesn't mean Westburg won't be able to avoid it, and he absolutely could. But that is where we kind of stand at the moment. He could miss more time. If the Orioles think that, do they go outside the organization? I think they believe in Mayo's bat. I think they believe in Blaze Alexander's glove to cover third base, especially once Jackson Holliday's back. But unfortunately, they can't morph those two into one player with a good bat and a good glove. So if the Orioles believe that maybe Mayo's defense and Blaze's offense just aren't good enough to rely on for a big chunk of the season if Westburg's going to be out, they could make an outside addition. Free agent-wise, the best fit, honestly, by far, is our old friend Ramon Urias, who the Orioles traded to the Astros at last year's deadline. He was then terrible with Houston. He had a 76 WRC+. He struck out a ton. The Astros non-tendered him this offseason, making him a free agent, even though he did have 1 year remaining on his contract. So the Orioles could pick him up for very little. His defense got better again last year at third base and second base. There's a good relationship between the two sides. The Orioles know him well. He's coming off a bad season, but he's only 31 years old, and none of his underlying data looks any different in 2025 than it did in the previous years when he was a more productive hitter. You could bring in Ramon Urias. He could kind of split time at third base with Kobe Mayo for the first few weeks while Holiday's out and Alexander plays second. And then when Jackson Holliday comes back, you just keep Ramon Urias on the bench and you just, option a Luis Vasquez type player and you go from there, or even you DFA Ramon Urias. Like if he's not really cutting it, or if Mayo's not really cutting it, you could option him to AAA. Like there are ways that you could keep Ramon Urias around even when Holliday comes back if you want to. And you could also have a situation where you have, Alexander and Urias and Mayo to choose from at third base. And again, if he looks bad, you can DFA, maybe be able to keep him. There's not a ton of interest in him since he's still a free agent at this point. After Ramon Urias, it's not great out there. Jose Iglesias is 36. He was horrendous for the Padres last year. Thairo Estrada's bat has been terrible for the last 2 years and hasn't played third base in the big league since 2022. Luis Urias, Ramon's little brother, is only 28, but he was pretty bad for the A's last year, and DJ LeMahieu looks cooked. Those are probably the next 4 free agent third basemen that are still on the market here as we get to late February. It's a tough time to have an injury that could be serious for the O's. Maybe you turn your attention to the trade market. There are 3 big names who could be shopped. Astros are certainly shopping Isaac Paredes, their third baseman, 27-year-old who had a 128 WRC plus in Houston last year before his late season injury. The ballpark probably zaps his pull power. He's a guy who just whips line drives into left field corner and feeds off left field short porches. That's why he was so good in Houston. That's why he hit well in Tampa Bay when he was there. But he's still a good hitter, and you still play 81 games outside of Oriole Park. He's not very good at third base defensively, but he's probably no worse and still probably a little better than Kobe Mayo at this point. It's 20 homer pop, 20-plus homer pop. He doesn't strike out much. He walks a ton. He'd be pretty cheap this year, and he would have a $13 million team option for 2027, so you could even trade him away next offseason if Westburg's ready to go. He can kind of be a perfect stopgap guy if the O's want to go get him. There is Brett Beatty of the Mets, who's being, pushed out a little bit as they've added the, Jorge Polanco's and the Bo Bichettes, and they still have Francisco Lindor on this team. They traded for Marcus Semien. Beatty could be the odd man out. They're maybe trying to move him to the bullpen, but he's a third baseman by trade. He broke out a bit. He finally got a good big league season, had a 111 WRC plus last year. He's 26. He's not a free agent until after 2029. He's a plus defender at third base. That could be a fit if the Orioles really wanted to go there, although the cost could be high. And then finally, there is Alec Boehm. He's 29 years old. He'd be a rental. He's a free agent after 2026. He's been an above-average bat for the past 3 years, but the third base defense has been fluctuating and hasn't really been great lately. Is he an upgrade over Mayo? Maybe, but for only 1 year. Philly has been trying to kind of quietly move on from him the past couple of years and just hasn't found suitors. I'm not sure he's really the fix. And I feel like guys like Paredes and Beatty would be too expensive for what the Orioles still have right now. I just feel like they either sign Ramon Urias to a cheap 1 year deal or they do nothing. I really think that's what they're going to do. I certainly think they'll keep an eye on the trade market, maybe if other names pop up. But it's no doubt about one thing. The Orioles are worse now than before, having Jordan Westburg suffer potentially a serious injury that's going to keep him out for a chunk of the season. I mean, looking at the lineup, it's like, imagine the Orioles had not signed Pete Alonso. You'd be looking at Ryan Mountcastle over at first base with Kobe Mayo at third, and you would really not feel good about this offense. This is still a great offense that added Pete Alonso, that added Taylor Ward, is hopefully getting a lot healthier among guys not named Jordan Westburg. They're going to have Jackson Holliday back pretty early in the season. That Blaze Alexander edition is looking better and better by the day, so kudos to Mike Elias on that one. I think a lot of that trade went into, we are really concerned about Jordan Westburg's health because of the oblique even before the elbow. Now the elbow is obviously making things worse, so we will see. Westburg, he got his second opinion from one of the top, Tommy John doctors, Dr. Elatrosh in LA. He determined that PRP injection and rest was the best route, which is the same as what the Orioles team doctor said. That's from the Orioles beat writers on Friday. So the PRP, it could have some more success, less stress on the arm for a position player. We'll see. Elias's quote was, if the surgery might not be necessary and there's a possibility it's never necessary, you do what you can to avoid it. That's pretty much how players see it. That's how teams see it. And so they will try and push it off as long as they can, and we shall see. But whenever we get updates, I'll certainly have them covered here for you on the Locked On Orioles podcast. But they're going to be without Jordan Westburg for a little while, and we're going to see, really, what Kobe Mayo can do. This is his time to shine. If he's not going to take it now, he's never really going to be able to take a chance to be a big part of this Orioles team. That'll do it for today. That'll do it for the week on the show. There are baseball games on today. Let's go. Orioles, Yankees, 105 on Masson. Spring training play opens. Trevor Rogers is on the bump. Kobe Mayo is starting at third base. You'll get to see some Jeremiah Jackson. Heston Kjerstad's in the outfield for this game. Samuel Basayo's catching for this game. There's a pretty strong lineup out there for the Orioles. Yeah, let's do it. 3 games this weekend. I will recap everything you need to know from all 3 when I am back on Monday's episode. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.